What if the most dangerous character on a children's show is not the villain, not the monster, not the ancient entity erasing reality from the inside out, but the guy sleeping on the couch? I need you to sit with that for a second, because there is a character in the amazing world of Gumball who has been sitting on a couch for 6 seasons, eating sausages, watching television, pulling pranks on his children, and failing at every conceivable adult responsibility. And almost nobody has ever stopped to ask what that actually means. Not what it means for the comedy, not what it means for the plot, what it means as an idea. What a show is quietly saying about human beings when it places a man who has completely, thoroughly, joyfully opted out of thinking at the center of a family, and then builds an entire reality around protecting his right to stay exactly where he is. His name is Richard Watterson. He is a 38-year-old pink rabbit. He is the father of 3 children. He is married to the most capable person in the entire town of Elmore. He has never held a job for more than a few hours. He once spent the family's entire savings on a star, not a metaphor, an actual star, in space. That later died. He put cement in cupcakes because he confused it with flour. He tried to move a bag of trash by staring at it and saying the word "move" out loud. He has, on multiple occasions, nearly gotten his children killed through sheer inattention to the basic mechanics of being alive. And he is happy. That is the part that should bother you. Not the stupidity, not the laziness, not even the irresponsibility, the happiness, the quiet, settled, undisturbed contentment of a man who has never once looked at his own life and asked whether it could be different, whether it should be different, whether the fact that he is incapable of basic tasks is something that ought to concern him even slightly. There is an episode called The Joy, Season 3, Episode 4, aired January 16th, 2014, that crystallizes this in a way that I think is genuinely unsettling once you start thinking about it. Richard wakes up one morning and finds Gumball and Darwin looking sad. He doesn't ask why they're sad. He doesn't try to understand their sadness. He doesn't sit with them in their sadness or help them process it. He gives them what the episode calls a wonder hug, a hug so powerful, so concentrated in its pure, unthinking positivity that it infects them. It literally infects them. The joy spreads through the school like a virus. Other children catch it. It spreads through physical contact. The infected students walk around with enormous fixed grins and glowing yellow eyes, hugging anyone they can reach. The episode is shot and edited like a zombie horror film. It has the visual grammar of an outbreak movie. The joy virus is presented through the show's visual language as a plague. The school goes on lockdown. Miss Simeon investigates. The camera angles are low and ominous. The infected students move in groups, moaning with happiness, reaching for the uninfected. And the source is Richard's hug. Richard's unexamined, unreflective, purely appetitive response to his children's sadness. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not try to understand. He applied happiness directly, like a bandage over a wound he didn't look at. And the happiness spread without containment and without understanding, and without anyone choosing to feel it. This is, I think, the show's most precise commentary on the difference between examined and unexamined emotional responses. Socrates believed that the correct response to suffering is understanding. You sit with the pain. You ask what caused it. You examine the beliefs that led to it. You work through the discomfort until you arrive at a clearer understanding of yourself and your situation. The examined response to sadness is not to make it go away. It is to learn from it. Richard's response is to hug it until it becomes something else. And the show, through the horror movie framing, is telling you that this approach, however loving in its intention, is dangerous. Unexamined happiness imposed on others is not kindness. It is a virus. It spreads without consent. It replaces genuine emotion with forced positivity. It turns a school full of individuals into a herd of grinning, identical, unthinking, joyful bodies. And Richard has no idea. He goes home after delivering the hug and presumably falls asleep on the couch. The epidemic unfolds without him. He is the origin of a plague he will never know about. The show doesn't even give him a scene where he learns what happened. He just disappears from the episode, the unexamined source of an examined catastrophe. 2,400 years ago, a man stood in an Athenian courtroom, on trial for his life, and said something that has been echoing through every century since. He said the unexamined life is not worth living. Well, his name was Socrates. They killed him for it. And then they spent the next 2.5 millennia arguing about whether he was right. Tonight, we're going to look at Richard Watterson through the lens of Socrates, through Plato's cave, through the Socratic method, through the idea that ignorance is not just an absence of knowledge, but a choice, a condition, a way of being in the world that has consequences for everyone around the person who has chosen it. And I think by the end of this, you're going to see Richard very differently. Not as the lovable idiot dad, not as the comic relief, as something Socrates would have recognized immediately, as the person his entire philosophy was built to wake up. So if you're watching this late at night, get comfortable. We're going to be here for a while, and if you haven't subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these for you. Let's go. There is a scene in the season 2 episode called The Authority, episode 19, that aired on April 29th, 2013, that does something most viewers laugh at and immediately move past. Granny Jojo, Richard's mother, has moved into the Watterson house temporarily. She is convinced Nicole is a bad mother. She takes over the parenting of Gumball, Darwin, and Aeneas, and her method is simple. She scares them. She shows them that the world outside the house is dangerous. She teaches them that thinking is dangerous. She teaches them that doing anything at all is dangerous. She teaches them that the only safe choice is to sit on the couch, eat the snacks she has prepared, and never ever think for themselves. And within a single episode, all 3 children transform. They gain weight. Then they lose the ability to perform basic tasks. They become, in the show's own visual language, miniature versions of Richard. The same blank expression, the same slack posture, the same complete absence of independent thought, the same absolute comfort with that absence. Nicole sees what has happened, and she is furious. But then she stops, and the episode does something genuinely clever. Nicole realizes that this is not a new problem. This is an old one. This is the answer to the question the show has been casually posing since the first episode. Why is Richard the way he is? And the answer is Granny Jojo. The answer is a childhood spent being sheltered so completely, protected so thoroughly from any form of risk or thought or independent decision-making, that Richard never developed the basic cognitive tools that would allow him to function as an adult. He never had to think, so he never learned how. And by the time anyone noticed, it was too late. The absence of thought had calcified into a personality. Now here's the thing. Here's the part I keep coming back to. Socrates would have looked at Granny Jojo and said, "Yes, this is exactly what I was talking about, not the specific parenting, the principle underneath it." Because Socrates believed that the most dangerous thing you could do to a human being was not to hurt them, or deprive them, or challenge them. The most dangerous thing you could do was to remove the need for them to think, to make them comfortable enough that the muscles of examination atrophied entirely, and to build a cave around them so complete that they never even suspected there was a world outside it. Plato wrote it down. You know the story. It's in Book 7 of the Republic. A group of prisoners chained inside a cave since childhood. They can only see one wall. Behind them is a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, people carry objects that cast shadows on the wall. The prisoners watch the shadows. They name them. They discuss them. They develop expertise about them. They think the shadows are reality. They have no idea they are looking at distortions of things they have never seen. Richard Watterson lives in a cave. The couch is the chain. The television is the wall. The shadows are the sitcom version of reality that the show itself is constantly drawing your attention to. And the version where a man who cannot cook or drive or hold a job or take out the trash is lovable instead of alarming. Where his wife working herself to the bone at a job that pays her $950 a month to support a family of 5 is just background noise for his latest nap. Where his children developing the same patterns of avoidance and laziness is a running gag rather than a generational tragedy. I need you to think about what this show just did on a children's network in 11-minute episodes. The amazing world of Gumball created a character who embodies Plato's cave allegory so precisely that you could teach an introductory philosophy course with nothing but Richard Watterson clips and a copy of the Republic. And it did it without ever once asking you to notice. I've rewatched The Authority probably 6 times putting this video together, and every time, the thing that gets me is not Granny Jojo's overprotectiveness. It's Nicole's face when she figures it out. There's this moment where she looks at her children, who have become fat and vacant and unable to think, and she looks at Richard, who has been fat and vacant and unable to think for their entire marriage, and you can see the connection land. You can see her understand that the man she married was manufactured, not born this way, made this way, deliberately, through a parenting philosophy that decided the safest child was the one who never had to make a decision. And then, the episode asks the real question, the Socratic question, which is, now that you know, what do you do about it? And Nicole's answer is to put the children in a car and force them to remember how to drive. It is terrifying and chaotic, and the car loses its roof going under a semi-truck. But they remember. They find their way back to independent thought. They survive the cave. Richard does not. Richard is sitting in the car the whole time, just as unable as the children were, just as lost, just as manufactured. But the episode does not fix Richard. It does not give him a revelation. It gives him a brake pedal, and he presses it, and the car stops, and the family laughs, and then they all pass out from shock, and the episode ends. Richard goes back to the couch. The cave remains. That is the show's argument, and I don't think nearly enough people have noticed it. There's a concept in Socratic philosophy that doesn't get talked about as much as the cave or the examined life, but I think it might be the most important one when it comes to understanding Richard. Socrates called it double ignorance. Simple ignorance is when you don't know something and you know you don't know it. That's fine. That's the starting point. Every human being begins there. Double ignorance is when you don't know something and you don't know that you don't know it. You think you already have the answer. You think the shadows on the wall are the real thing. You are not just ignorant. You are ignorant of your own ignorance. And that second layer makes the first one almost impossible to fix. Richard Watterson is the most perfectly constructed example of double ignorance I have ever seen in any piece of media. He does not know things. That is obvious. Everyone in the show knows Richard doesn't know things. But the crucial detail, the thing that separates Richard from a merely stupid character and makes him a philosophical problem, is that Richard does not know he doesn't know things. He is not a man aware of his own limitations, who has chosen comfort anyway. He is a man who has no idea his limitations exist. Look at the season 2 episode called The Job, episode 8, aired September 18th. 2012. Richard gets a job as a pizza delivery guy, and the fabric of reality starts tearing apart. Literally, the universe begins to disintegrate. Nicole faints at the news. Lightning strikes Richard's finger. Buildings dissolve. People glitch. The banana family gets stuck in an infinite loop saying pizza over and over. The show is telling you that through the language of its own reality, that Richard having a job is so fundamentally wrong, so contrary to the nature of the universe the show has built, that it threatens existence itself. And here's what kills me about this episode. Richard has no idea. He is thrilled. He is delivering pizzas on a scooter with the enthusiasm of a child who has just been given his first bicycle. He is singing. He is proud. Nicole is panicking. The children are trying to get him fired to save reality. And Richard is just happy. He is performing his job badly, eating the middle out of the pizzas and gluing them back together, dropping boxes everywhere, and feeling genuine pride in himself for the first time in what the show implies has been his entire adult life. The universe has to intervene to remove him from productive employment. Think about that. Then the show built a reality where a man being useful is an existential threat, and the man himself is the only person who cannot see it. Socrates went around Athens doing something very specific. He would approach people who believed they were wise, people who had positions of authority or expertise or reputation, and he would ask them questions, simple questions, the kind of questions a child might ask. And through the questioning, through the gentle, persistent, patient process of following each answer to its logical conclusion, he would reveal that the person did not actually know what they claimed to know. The craftsman who thought he understood justice because he understood craftsmanship. The politician who thought he understood virtue because he understood power. The poet who thought he understood truth because he understood beauty. Socrates showed each of them the gap between what they believed about themselves and what was actually true. They hated him for it. Obviously, nobody wants to be shown the gap. The gap is where the cold air comes in. The gap is the moment you realize the ceiling you've been living under might not be a ceiling at all, but a wall you built yourself. Richard has never been shown the gap. That is the show's most careful choice. In 6 seasons of the amazing world of Gumball, across over 200 episodes, nobody has ever successfully shown Richard the space between who he thinks he is and who he actually is. Not because nobody has tried. Nicole tries constantly. Anais, his genius 4-year-old daughter, tries. Even Gumball and Darwin, who love him with the uncomplicated devotion of children who have not yet fully understood what they're looking at, try occasionally. But Richard has a defense mechanism that Socrates never encountered in Athens, one that is more powerful than any argument or revelation or moment of clarity. Richard is immune to the gap because he has no conception that the gap exists. You cannot show someone the distance between their self-image and reality if their self-image has no defined edges. Richard does not think he is smart. He does not think he is dumb. He does not think about himself at all. He simply is. He exists in a state of such complete unreflectiveness that the Socratic method, the most powerful tool for intellectual awakening ever devised, slides off him like water off a particularly contented duck. The Season 2 episode The Hero, Episode 22, aired June 19th, 2013, confronts this directly. Gumball and Darwin are asked by their classmates what their dad is good at. The other kids brag about their fathers. Masami's dad is rich. Banana Joe's dad is rich in vitamins. Terry's dad can beat rock. Hector's dad is so big that hikers get lost in his belly button. And Gumball and Darwin cannot think of a single thing Richard does well. They land on gaining weight and sweating without moving. They don't mean to be cruel. They are genuinely trying to find something, and they can't. Richard overhears this, and he is devastated. He hides in the shed. He looks at old photos of his children. He is hurt in the specific, childlike way that Richard experiences all of his emotions, which is immediately and completely, and without any of the buffering that adults normally use to process difficult feelings. Here's what the episode does not do, and this is important. It does not use Richard's pain as a doorway to self-reflection. It does not give him a moment where he sits in the shed and thinks, maybe they're right. Maybe I should change. Maybe I should learn to cook without cement, or hold a job without destroying reality. His pain is real. His sadness is genuine, but it produces no examination. It produces only the desire to feel better. And the show resolves this by having Darwin stage a rescue mission where Richard gets to save his sons from a car crusher at a junkyard and feel like a hero again. The feeling is restored. The gap is papered over. Richard goes back to the couch. And the picture Gumball and Darwin draw for him, reading "Our hero," gets nailed to the wall of the shed. And then Richard accidentally nails his own sleeve to the wall, trying to hang it up. He frowns. The episode ends. The last image is a man who has just been reassured of his own worth, standing trapped by his own incompetence. And the show holds that image long enough for you to feel both things at once. The warmth and the problem. The love and the warning. Socrates believed something that most people, when they first encounter it, find either beautiful or offensive. He believed that nobody does wrong willingly. He believed that all wrongdoing comes from ignorance. If a person truly understood the good, truly knew what was right, and why it was right, they would do it. And they would do it because doing good is the natural response of an informed soul. Evil is not a choice. It is a failure to see. I've been thinking about this for weeks in relation to Richard, and I think the show is making a version of this argument that is both kinder and more disturbing than anything Socrates said in Athens. Richard does not do harm willingly. Nobody watching the show would ever accuse Richard of malice. He loves his family. He loves them with a sincerity that the show protects carefully, never allowing it to become ironic or performative. When Nicole needs comfort, he provides it in his own clumsy way. When his children need him, he shows up, poorly, chaotically, but he shows up. He is not a bad person, but he does harm, consistently, repeatedly, across every season. And he does harm through a mechanism that Socrates would have identified in about 30 seconds of conversation. He does not examine his choices because he does not know that his choices are choices. He does not know that the way he lives is a way rather than the way. He has never compared his approach to life with any alternative because the concept of an alternative has never occurred to him. In The Treasure, Season 2, Episode 10, aired October 25th, 2012, Gumball, Darwin, and Aeneas discover why their family is poor. They notice that everything they own is a bargain basement version of something else. Their MP3 player is a calculator with a headset stuck in it. Their blender is an electric fan pointed at a bowl. They go on a treasure hunt to find where the family's money went. And they discover that Richard, sometime after Gumball was born, they clicked on an internet ad for an out-of-space investment opportunity and spent the family's entire savings on a star, a literal star, in actual space. He didn't read the full page before clicking yes. The rest of the page, which loaded after he had already committed, explained that the investment was for children 9 generations down the Watterson bloodline. His children's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren's children. The company went bankrupt. The money was gone. The star, which the family goes to see at the end of the episode, fizzles out while they're looking at it. I'm going to say something about this that might sound harsh, but I think the show is saying it too, just quietly, just in the background, just under the comedy. Richard impoverished his family because he does not examine his choices. Not because he is evil or selfish or deliberately careless, because the concept of pausing before acting, of reading before clicking, of thinking before deciding, of examining any component of any choice he makes at any point in his life is simply not part of how he operates. And the consequences of this single unexamined moment have shaped every day of his family's life since. Nicole earns $950 a month at the Rainbow Factory. She is the only income earner in a family of 5. She works constantly. She is stressed beyond what any person should endure. She has, in multiple episodes, been shown to have physical symptoms of overwork, rage so intense it manifests visually as flames, anxiety so acute she faints at the concept of change, a baseline exhaustion that the show treats as her normal state. And all of this, then the entire architecture of Nicole's suffering, rests on top of a single unexamined click. Socrates would not have blamed Richard. Socrates didn't blame anyone. He pitied them. That is what made him dangerous. Not anger, not condemnation, not the satisfaction of being right. Pity, the specific, unsettling, deeply uncomfortable pity of a person who sees someone living in chains and understands that the chains are invisible to the person wearing them. I want to talk about something the show does that I think is one of the cleverest things in all of animated television, and I have genuinely never seen anyone discuss it. The show makes Richard's ignorance structural. It builds it into the rules of the universe. In The Job, when Richard gets employment and reality starts disintegrating, the show is doing something beyond a sight gag, and it is establishing, in the actual mechanics of how Elmore works, that Richard's role is to be unproductive. It is cosmically mandated. The universe itself cannot sustain a Richard who contributes. Larry, the employee at the pizza place, says it directly. He says that tearing apart the fabric of the universe is not a dismissible offense. He cannot fire Richard for destroying reality. He can only fire him for eating a customer's pizza. This is the show encoding Richard's condition into the DNA of its world. And I need you to think about what that means philosophically, because what the show is doing is taking Plato's cave and turning it inside out. In Plato's version, the cave is a prison. The prisoners could theoretically be freed. The chains could be broken. Someone could drag them into the sunlight, and after the pain of adjustment, and they would see reality. There is always the possibility of awakening. In Gumball's version, the cave is the universe. Richard cannot leave because there is no outside. The show has declared, through its own rules, that Richard's ignorance is not a condition to be cured, but a feature to be maintained. He is literally not allowed to change. The universe won't let him. And I think that is one of the most sophisticated philosophical moves I have ever seen a cartoon make. Because think about what the show is really asking. It's asking whether some people are imprisoned, not by external forces, not by bad luck or bad parenting or bad choices, but by the structure of reality itself, by the role they have been assigned, by the slot they occupy in a system that needs them to stay exactly where they are. Richard cannot have a job because the show needs him on the couch. The universe cannot sustain his productivity because the narrative requires his passivity. He is chained to the wall of the cave, not by Granny JoJo's parenting, though that is the in-universe explanation, but by the show itself, by the genre, by the format, by the 11-minute sitcom structure that needs a bumbling dad the way a joke needs a punchline. And here is where it gets genuinely unsettling. Are there people in the real world whose role in the system is to not examine their lives? Not because they lack the capacity, not because nobody offered them the tools, but because the system, the economic system, the social system, the cultural system needs them right where they are. Comfortable enough to not ask questions, fed enough to not cause trouble, entertained enough to never notice the chains, happy enough to blink and say they discovered happiness. Socrates was executed for asking questions like this. The Athenian jury decided his questions were too dangerous. They said he was corrupting the youth. What he was actually doing was showing people the cave, and the cave did not appreciate being shown. I want to take a left turn here. I know I keep circling back to the same ideas, but I think this one's going to connect in a way that surprises you. Bear with me. There is a character in Gumball who is Richard's exact opposite, not Nicole, though Nicole is certainly everything Richard is not in practical terms. I'm talking about Anais, the youngest Watterson child. She is 4 years old. She is a genius. She is, by every measure the show provides, she's the most intelligent person in the family by an enormous margin. She reads books the other children don't understand. She solves problems the adults cannot identify. She is aware of her own intelligence and frustrated by its limitations within a family that does not operate at her level. Anais is Socrates. I am not being cute. I mean this structurally. She is the person in the family who asks the questions nobody else thinks to ask. She is the one who notices the shadows don't match the objects casting them. She is the one who, in The Treasure, pushes the investigation forward when Gumball and Darwin have already decided that Nicole spent $24,000 on a shovel and they should go to bed. She says no, that's another clue. She insists on following the thread. She demands examination, and the family resists her, constantly. When they love her, but they resist her. Gumball and Darwin treat her intellect as annoying. Richard cannot engage with it at all. Even Nicole, who is the most capable adult in the house, sometimes finds Anais's relentless questioning exhausting rather than illuminating. Socrates described this exact dynamic. He said that when the freed prisoner returns to the cave and tries to tell the others what he has seen, they do not thank him. They laugh at him. They think he has gone mad. And in certain versions of the allegory, they threaten to kill him because the news he brings, that reality is not what you think it is. That comfort is a cage. That the shadows are lies. That information is not dangerous or harmful or annoying but necessary is news that the cave dwellers did not ask for and do not want. Anais has never been listened to the way Socrates was never listened to. She is right about things. She is right more often than anyone else in the family. And being right has never once been sufficient to change the family's trajectory. Because being right, as Socrates learned, is not enough. You also have to be heard. And the cave has a way of making the acoustics unfriendly to the truth. Okay, I've mentioned this briefly, but I want to go deeper into it because I think it's the most emotionally complicated part of this whole analysis. And honestly, it's the part that makes me feel the most conflicted every time I rewatch these episodes. Nicole chose Richard. That's not subtext. The show tells you this directly, beautifully, in one of the most critically acclaimed episodes in the entire run. The Choices, Season 5, Episode 6, aired September 29th, 2016. The episode has a 9.8 rating on IMDb. It is frequently cited as one of the greatest episodes of the entire series. And what it does is show you, in excruciating detail, every alternative path Nicole's life could have taken and why she chose the one she's on. The episode starts at dinner. The family is being chaotic. Food is flying. Richard is being Richard. And Nicole pauses. The show literally freezes everyone else and lets her think. She goes back to the day she met Richard. She was a teenager. Her parents were controlling and demanding. Her mother had her entire life mapped out, minute by minute. Nicole would graduate in 54,321 minutes, get her law degree in 374,582 minutes, marry a doctor in 754,471 minutes. Every second accounted for, every choice pre-selected. And then she met Richard. A boy sitting on a bench, eating a nut, wearing a shirt with a logo that looked like the Nirvana smiley face. He was doing nothing. He had no plan. He had no ambitions. He had no expectations of her or of himself or of anything. He just was. He existed. He sat on the bench and ate his nut. And when Nicole asked him what she should do with her life, he said something that the show treats as genuinely profound. He said, "Maybe start living it." And I need to stop here because I've watched this moment probably 10 times putting this together, and it hits differently every single time. Richard, the man who has never examined a single choice in his life, says the single most useful thing anyone says to Nicole in the entire episode. Not her parents with their minute-by-minute life plan. Not the alternative futures with their impressive careers and dramatic downfalls. Richard, sitting on a bench, eating half a nut, says, "Maybe start living it." And he doesn't know what he said. He has no idea that he has just delivered something that sounds, if you tilt your head, like a distillation of an entire philosophical tradition. He's just answering a question. He's just being Richard. And Nicole looks at him and sees something that none of the alternatives, however impressive they were, could offer her. She sees a person who is already doing the thing she is trying to figure out how to do. He is living his life, right now, without a plan, without a map, without minute-by-minute instructions from someone else. Is that wisdom? Socrates would say no. Wisdom requires examination. Wisdom requires knowledge of one's own ignorance. Wisdom requires the relentless, uncomfortable, often painful process of turning every belief over and over until you understand what it actually is. Richard has done none of this. He said something wise by accident, in the same way that a broken clock shows the correct time twice a day. He was not wise. He was lucky. But the show gives that accidental wisdom a weight that deliberate wisdom does not have in this episode. Nicole's parents, who have examined her life with microscopic precision, who have planned every minute and measured every outcome, produce a path that leads to loneliness and authoritarian rule. Richard, who has examined nothing, produces a path that leads to a food fight with the people you love. And the food fight wins, not because it's better, because it's real. And the show builds the entire montage from there. And Nicole, pushing Richard on a swing. Richard falling off the swing because he's too heavy. The two of them lying in a field, eating ramen in a cramped apartment next to a train station, getting pregnant, getting married in a park with 2 empty chairs where her parents were supposed to sit, holding newborn Gumball, measuring Gumball's height on a wall, adopting Darwin, welcoming Aeneas, building a life that is messy and poor and chaotic, and held together by something that the show, after going through every possible alternative, identifies as irreplaceable. Nicole could have been a champion martial artist, a lawyer, a dictator of a futuristic empire. Every alternative path the episode shows is more successful by conventional measures, and every single one of them ends badly, ends in loneliness, or corruption, or revolution. Only the path with Richard, the path that leads to the chaotic dinner table and the food fight and the children screaming for more, only that path ends with Nicole saying she wouldn't change a thing. This is extraordinary, and it is also, I think, the most Socratically complex thing the show has ever done, because Socrates would have had questions about this choice, hard ones, the kind that don't have comfortable answers. Socrates believed that to truly choose something, you had to understand it. A choice made in ignorance is not a real choice. It is a reflex, a reaction, a shadow on the wall that you reach for because it's the only thing you can see. Nicole chose Richard, and the show frames this as beautiful and genuine and worthy. But the show also spends 6 seasons showing you the cost, the poverty, the exhaustion, the rage, and the children developing patterns of avoidance and laziness that mirror their fathers. The weight on Nicole's shoulders that never lightens. Did Nicole choose Richard, or did Nicole choose escape? Did she choose love, or did she choose the opposite of her parents' control? Socrates would have asked this. He would have sat across from Nicole in one of those Athenian colonnades and asked, with genuine curiosity, not cruelty, do you love this man, or do you love the freedom his thoughtlessness represents? Do you love his simplicity, or do you love the absence of your mother's demands? Is this a choice, or is this a reaction to a cage disguised as a choice? And Nicole, who is intelligent enough to hear the question and honest enough to feel its weight, might not have had an answer. The show doesn't give her one. It gives her a food fight. And sometimes, honestly, I think the food fight might be the answer. But here's the thing, Socrates might have missed. And I think this is where the show pushes past philosophy and into something genuinely its own. Socrates believed that the examined life was the only life worth living. He was absolute about this. He chose death over the inability to keep asking questions. He told the Athenian jury that he could never stop questioning, even if it killed him, because to stop questioning was to stop living in any meaningful sense. Richard has never asked a question that mattered. He has never examined a choice. He has never looked at his own life and wondered if it could be different. And he is, by the show's own careful, consistent, unironic presentation, happy, not performing happiness, not avoiding sadness, happy, genuinely, simply, in the way that Socrates would have said was impossible, happy without examination. And the show does not resolve this tension. It does not tell you that Richard's happiness is fake or insufficient, or that Socrates was right all along. It also does not tell you that Socrates was wrong. It holds both things up, the examined life and the unexamined one, the philosopher and the rabbit on the couch, and lets you sit with the contradiction. And I think that's braver than picking a side. Let me tell you about The Routine. Season 4, Episode 11, aired October 5th, 2015. It is, I think, the most quietly brilliant, Richard episode the show has ever produced. And it is an episode that I genuinely believe could be taught in a philosophy class as a case study in the relationship between perception and reality. Nicole sends Richard to buy mayonnaise. One item, one task, one jar of mayo. She even writes it on a piece of paper for him. Get mayo. What follows is an 11-minute epic fantasy quest. A narrator speaking in the register of a Conan the Barbarian film accompanies Richard as he ventures forth in his trusty steed Cartax, which is the family car, which the narrator has named after Artax from the never-ending story. Richard drives through the valley of Cartastrophia, battles through the deadly vortex of the drive-through window, loses Cartax in the dreaded swamps of asphalt, which is a road under construction, fights a Tyrannosaurus Rex at the supermarket, retrieves the mayo, and returns home victorious. Nobody in his family notices. He falls asleep on the couch in the exact position he started in. Gumball takes the mayo. The narrator, revealed to be Cartax itself, in the family car, says, "To the beast, he is a thief. To his family, he is a huge slob. To his neighbors, he is the reason house prices are going down in the area. But to me, he will always be my master." Now, here's what this episode is doing, and I've watched it probably 8 times now, because every viewing reveals something new. This episode is Plato's cave told from inside the cave, by the shadows themselves. And the shadows are saying that the cave is heroic. Richard's quest is real to him. The danger is real to him. His courage is real to him. Within his perception, he has done something extraordinary. He has ventured into the unknown, faced monsters, lost his companion, persevered alone, and brought home the prize. By any internal measure, Richard Watterson is a hero, but the show gives you both perspectives simultaneously. That you see the epic quest, and you see the mundane errand. You see the dragon, and you see Tina Rex's dad at the grocery store. You see the swamps of asphalt, and you see road construction. You see a hero returning victorious, and you see a man who spent 7 hours buying mayo and fell asleep on the couch. Socrates would have asked Richard which version was real, and Richard would have said both. And Socrates would have pressed, are they both equally real? Is the hero's quest and the grocery errand the same thing? Can a shadow be as valid as the object casting it? And I think this is one of those moments where the show does something that nobody gives it enough credit for. Because the narrator, the voice telling the epic version of the story, is revealed at the very end of the episode to be the family car. Cartax. The car itself is narrating. And the car is the one who sees Richard as a hero, not the family, not Nicole, not the children. The car, an object, a machine, a thing that has no capacity for examination or critical thought. And the car says, to me, he will always be my master. The unexamined perspective calls him a hero. The examined perspective, the family who sees him asleep on the couch when they get home, calls him a slob. And the show asks you to hold both without choosing, to feel the warmth of the hero story and the cold of the slob reality, and to sit in the space between them. I've been thinking about this for weeks, honestly. There's something about that final shot, Richard asleep on the couch in the exact position he started in, that captures something the show has been doing from its very first episode, the circular nature of Richard's existence. And he begins and ends in the same place. He goes on a journey and returns unchanged. He experiences everything and learns nothing. And the show, brilliantly, frames this not as failure, but as a kind of completion, a circle that closes, an orbit that maintains. And here is what I keep coming back to. The show does not tell you Richard is wrong. It does not mock the hero's quest. It presents it with genuine visual ambition, genuine stakes within its own logic, genuine emotional beats. Richard is scared. He is brave. He perseveres. The episode treats his internal experience with respect, even as it shows you, from the outside, how absurd it looks. This is the most generous possible version of the cave allegory. Plato's version is a prison. The prisoners are pitiable. They need to be freed. Gumball's version asks a different question. What if the prisoner is not pitiable? What if the prisoner's experience inside the cave is rich and meaningful and emotionally valid? What if the shadows are enough? Not because the shadows are reality, but because the experience of engaging with them is real, even if their source is not? I don't think Socrates would have had an easy answer for this, and I don't think the show wants him to. There is a character I haven't talked about yet, who I think completes the philosophical picture the show is building around Richard, and it's someone most people overlook entirely. Larry Needlemeyer, the rock-headed guy who works at every store in Elmore, every single one. He is the cashier at the convenience store, the employee at the pizza place, the guy behind the counter at the video rental, the attendant at the gas station. But Larry works everywhere because Larry has to work everywhere. And the reason Larry has to work everywhere is directly connected to the reason Richard doesn't work anywhere. In The Laziest, Season 1, Episode 11, the show reveals something crucial. Larry used to be the laziest person in Elmore. He held the title. He was known as Lazy Larry, and then Richard Watterson beat him. Richard was lazier, and Larry, having lost his title, went the other direction entirely. He became the hardest working person in town. He works constantly, holds down multiple jobs simultaneously, has a girlfriend, has a car, has a life he built through effort and discipline, and the deliberate choice to be something other than what he was. And then Gumball and Darwin, trying to win a bet with their father about who can find someone lazier than Richard. It destroys Larry's life in a single day. They cause him to lose his job, his girlfriend, his car, everything he built. And Larry, depressed and hollowed out, sits back down on the couch and becomes lazy again. He lets it happen. The episode shows him gaining weight, slumping into the same posture Richard has, accepting the old identity, like putting on a coat you thought you'd thrown away. Now, I need you to think about what this means in Socratic terms. Larry is the freed prisoner. He is the man who escaped the cave, who saw the sunlight, who built a new life in the world above, and then 2 children from the cave, working on behalf of a man still chained to the wall, dragged him back down, not through force, through destruction of everything that made his examined life possible. They didn't argue him back into the cave, and they just burned down the world outside it. Socrates described this. He said the freed prisoner, when returning to the cave, would be mocked and attacked. He said the cave dwellers would kill the person trying to enlighten them. But the show does something even darker than Plato's version. In the show, the cave dwellers don't even understand what they're doing. Gumball and Darwin are not trying to keep Larry in the cave. They don't know there's a cave. They are just trying to win a bet. The philosophical destruction is collateral damage from a game they're playing with their father. And Richard is on the couch the entire time. He never participates in the destruction of Larry's life. He just bets that he's the laziest person in Elmore, and then sits there while his children go out and make sure it stays true. The cave doesn't have to do anything aggressive. It just has to exist. The gravity of settled ignorance pulls everything toward itself without effort. The show doesn't resolve this. Larry snaps back to his hardworking self by the next episode, as the show's episodic format demands. But the philosophical damage has been done. The show has shown you that the examined life, the life Larry built through effort and choice, and the deliberate rejection of his own laziness, is fragile. It can be undone in a day. The cave is always there, always waiting, always warm, and the couch never judges you for coming back. There's another Larry moment I want to highlight because I think it captures something essential about the show's relationship with Socratic philosophy. In multiple episodes across the series, when Larry quits his many jobs simultaneously, Elmore collapses. Civilization falls apart. The infrastructure that holds the town together depends entirely on one man working constantly at every position. If Larry stops, everything stops. Think about what the show is saying here. The examined life, the life of effort and productivity and engagement with reality, is what holds the world together. But it is held together by one person. Everyone else is some version of Richard. Everyone else is on some version of the couch. The entire structure of Elmore depends on one freed prisoner continuing to work while everyone else watches the shadows. And if that one prisoner sits down, the shadows stop too. Socrates said he was a gadfly. He said Athens needed to be stung to stay awake. But what if the gadfly isn't Socrates? What if the gadfly in this show is Larry, a man who works 7 jobs, who keeps everything running, who has seen both sides of the cave, the lazy and the productive, and who chose productivity not because he loves it, but because someone has to. Larry is the gadfly that keeps the machine running, and nobody thanks him, and everybody takes him for granted. And the people on the couch, the Richards of Elmore, receive the benefits of his labor without ever knowing it costs him anything. Okay, let me take this somewhere that I think is going to surprise you, because there's a dimension of Richard's character that most people read as pure comedy, but that I think, once you see it through the Socratic lens, becomes something much more interesting and much more troubling. Richard dresses as a woman. The show addresses this directly in the season 5 episode, The Lady, episode 23, aired January 19th, 2017. Richard has been secretly dressing as an older woman named Samantha to make friends. He goes out during the day while Nicole is at work and the kids are at school, puts on a dress and a wig, and socializes with a group of elderly women at various locations around Elmore. Gumball and Darwin discover this and initially think Richard is having an affair, but the truth is simpler and sadder than that. Richard is lonely. He is a stay-at-home father with no job, no hobbies, no friends his own age, and no way to connect with other adults during the long hours when his family is gone. So he created an alternate identity that allowed him to participate in social life in the only way he could figure out. And here's the part that hits me every time. When confronted, Richard admits that he created Samantha because he doesn't feel like he's good at being a man. He doesn't feel like he measures up to what men are supposed to be. He can't hold a job. He can't fix things properly. He can't provide for his family. He can't do the things that the culture around him has defined as masculine success. So he stepped outside of that definition entirely and found a space where the expectations were different, where he could simply exist socially without being measured against a standard he could never meet. Socrates would have been fascinated by this, not by the gender performance itself, but by the philosophical move underneath it. Richard, a man who examines nothing, who questions nothing, who has never once interrogated his own beliefs or assumptions, accidentally performed one of the most Socratic acts possible. He looked at a definition that was causing him pain, a definition of manhood that he could not fulfill, and instead of examining the definition, which would be the Socratic approach, he simply stepped around it. He didn't question whether the definition was correct. He didn't ask whether masculinity needed to include job holding and provider status and mechanical competence. He just put on a dress and went somewhere where those questions didn't apply. This is not examination. It is avoidance dressed as transformation. But it is also, in its own strange way, a kind of wisdom that Socrates' method doesn't account for. Sometimes the most practical response to a question you can't answer is not to keep asking it. And sometimes it is to walk into a different room where the question doesn't exist. The show does not judge Richard for this. It treats the revelation with genuine tenderness. The other women in the group are revealed to also be men in disguise, all of them doing the same thing Richard is doing, all of them performing a different identity because the one they have doesn't fit, and they don't have the tools to reshape it through examination. They have the tools to step around it, and they did, and they found each other, and they are happy. Every time I watch this episode, I think about Socrates walking into that room of men dressed as elderly women, playing bridge, and gossiping, and being, in their own unexamined way, more honest about their pain than any amount of philosophical inquiry could make them. And I think Socrates might have stood in the doorway and paused. Because for all his wisdom, for all his commitment to examination, I don't think Socrates had a framework for the kind of truth that emerges when people stop trying to answer the question and start trying to survive it. Now, I want to pull another thread, because there's something else happening with Richard that connects to Socratic philosophy in a way I've genuinely never seen anyone discuss, and it has to do with teaching. Socrates was, above everything else, a teacher, not in the formal sense. He held no classes. He charged no fees. He had no curriculum. But the Socratic method, the practice of asking questions to lead someone toward truth, is the most influential teaching method in the history of Western civilization. Law schools still use it. Medical schools still use it. Graduate seminars still use it. The idea that you teach not by telling, but by asking, that the student's understanding must come from within rather than being imposed from without. That the role of the teacher is to be a midwife of ideas rather than a dispenser of facts. All of this comes from Socrates. Richard is also a teacher. He is a terrible teacher, but he teaches constantly. He teaches Gumball and Darwin things that are wrong. He teaches them that laziness is a medical condition. He teaches them that the solution to not wanting to do chores is to trick someone else into doing them. He teaches them that reading the terms and conditions before clicking yes is not necessary. He teaches them, through demonstration rather than instruction, that the examined life is not just unnecessary, but actively unpleasant. And here's the part that I think is crucial. His teaching works. Gumball learns from Richard. Darwin learns from Richard. They absorb his approach to life, not because he explains it, but because he embodies it. Children learn not from what their parents say, but from what their parents are. And what Richard is, consistently and completely, is a person who has found a way to be happy without ever once thinking about whether his happiness is justified or sustainable, or purchased at someone else's expense. Socrates taught through questions. Richard teaches through example, and the example is more powerful. This is something that I think philosophy doesn't talk about enough. The Socratic method requires a willing student, and it requires someone who is already uncomfortable with their own ignorance, who feels the itch of not knowing, who is ready to be questioned. Richard's method requires nothing. It just requires being in the room. It operates through osmosis, through proximity, through the slow, steady, unremarkable process of a child watching their parent and absorbing what they see. The show documents this process with uncomfortable precision across every season. Watch how Gumball handles responsibility. Watch how he approaches problems. Watch how he relates to effort, to work, to the gap between what he knows and what he needs to know. And then watch Richard doing the same things in the same way. The apple and the tree, the shadow and the wall. In the season 4 episode called The Fridge, Gumball is ranked at the bottom of the family's achievement chart. But Nicole, horrified by this, embarks on a campaign to make him a winner. She pushes him. She competes with him. She drives the entire family into a frenzy of competitiveness that nearly tears them apart. And Gumball, the loser, the bottom of the chart, is the one who brings them back. He says he's content with where he is. He says he doesn't feel envy. He says the Tuesday-sized life is fine. He sounds exactly like his father. And the show frames this as the correct response, as the thing that saves the family from Nicole's overachieving spiral. The unexamined contentment that Richard modeled for Gumball becomes the antidote to the examined ambition that Nicole inherited from her parents. The cave saves the family from the sunlight. Socrates would have been deeply uncomfortable with this. The whole point of the cave allegory is that the sunlight is better. The whole point of the examined life is that it produces a superior way of being. And here is a show saying, no, actually, sometimes the cave is what holds things together. Sometimes the person who never questioned anything is the one who saves the people who question too much. I honestly don't know what to do with this. I've been turning it over for weeks. Part of me thinks the show is making a subtle critique that Richard's contentment is only functional because Nicole's competence keeps the infrastructure running. And without her examined approach to life, his unexamined approach would lead to starvation and homelessness. Part of me thinks the show is being sincere, that it genuinely believes the examined life can be as destructive as the unexamined one when it's pointed in the wrong direction. And part of me thinks the show is doing something even more interesting than either of those. I think it's saying that the examined life and the unexamined life are not opposites. They are complements. They need each other. Nicole without Richard is a missile with no target. Richard without Nicole is a target with no missile. The family works, imperfectly and chaotically, and barely, because it contains both, the philosopher and the cave dweller, the questioner and the questioned, the examined and the unexamined, sitting at the same dinner table, eating the same food, loving the same children, failing in complementary ways. That's not something Socrates ever proposed, and I think it might be true. Let me take you to an episode that I've watched 3 times in the last week, and it keeps revealing new layers. The Cycle, Season 5, Episode 21, aired February 22nd, 2017. In this episode, Gumball, Darwin, and Aeneas discover that Harold Wilson, Tobias's father, has been bullying Richard for most of his life, since high school, since a specific incident where Harold forged a letter from Principal Brown telling Richard he had been named prom king. Richard believed the letter. Obviously, he believed the letter. He has never in his life questioned a piece of information presented to him. He showed up to prom expecting a crown and was publicly humiliated in front of the entire school. And Harold has been picking on him ever since, into adulthood, in front of Richard's children. He rear-ends their car at the mall and throws his keys at Richard, telling him to park it in the shade. He replaces Richard's pants with a tighter pair while shopping. He uses the supermarket intercom to announce that Richard should come collect his dignity from the front desk. And Richard takes it, all of it, every insult, every humiliation, with a nervous chuckle and a sure thing. Now, Socrates had a word for the relationship between Harold and Richard. He would have called Harold an unexamined aggressor, a person who uses social power without questioning its source or its effects. Harold has never asked himself why he enjoys humiliating Richard. He has never examined what it says about him, that the defining relationship of his adult life is his capacity to make another man feel small. Harold is just as unexamined as Richard, but his unexamination points outward rather than inward. Richard's ignorance produces passivity. Harold's produces cruelty. Both are living in the cave. They are just chained to different walls. But the episode does something that I think is genuinely startling when you look at it through this lens. The children try to help Richard deal with Harold like an adult. They try therapy. Harold disguises himself as the therapist and humiliates Richard further. They try legal action. A lawyer charges them by the second, and they can't afford a full sentence of advice. They try to help Richard stand up for himself directly, but when asked to insult his own children as practice, Richard accidentally showers them with compliments instead. He cannot be mean. The capacity for cruelty is simply absent from his operating system. And here's the line that stopped me cold. When told he needs to deal with the situation, Richard says, "I am dealing with it like an adult. I'm pretending nothing's wrong until I get a chance to cry about it when I'm alone." I have thought about this line every day for a week, because it is, without Richard knowing it, a devastatingly precise description of what most adults actually do with their pain. Not the Socratic method, not examination, not questioning, just the management of suffering through concealment and private grief, just pretending and crying, just the couch and the shed. Socrates would have said this is wrong. Socrates would have said that the correct response to injustice is not to absorb it silently, but to examine it, to question it, to bring it into the light where it can be understood and addressed. But Richard does not have access to the Socratic response. He does not have the tools. He has only the tools Granny Jojo gave him, which are sit on the couch, feel nothing, wait for it to pass. And when those tools fail, when the pain is too big for the couch to absorb, he goes to the shed and cries alone. The episode ends with Richard quietly telling Harold that if he stacks his dynamite closer together, he'll get a more intensive blast. Harold's house explodes in the background. It is not a Socratic resolution. It is not justice through understanding. It is a man who cannot fight back, finding the one available angle and using it while walking away without looking at what he has done. It is brilliant and terrible and funny and sad, and it is everything the show does best. And there is The Deal, Season 5, Episode 34, aired September 22nd, 2017, which I think is the episode that comes closest to directly stating what the show thinks about Richard's value. Nicole gets Employee of the Month at the Rainbow Factory. She comes home bragging about it. She tears down the family portrait to hang her plaque in its place. And Richard, for once, is hurt. Not in the usual childlike way, in a deeper way. He says he does not feel appreciated. He says the work he does around the house, whatever minimal, chaotic work that is, goes unrecognized. The children encourage him to talk to Nicole about his feelings. Richard's attempt at a preparatory speech is a nonsensical blending of every motivational cliche he has ever heard, none of them connected to each other, none of them making sense. He cannot articulate what he feels. He does not have the vocabulary. He knows the feelings are there, but the tools for expressing them, the examined language that would allow him to name his experience and present it to another person, simply do not exist in his inventory. But the episode does something extraordinary at the end. The children are misbehaving. Nicole is losing control, and Richard, who has been feeling useless and unappreciated, steps in. He tells the three children that he will let one of them catapult the neighbor over the house. The children, confused, argue about who gets to do it. They fight amongst themselves. They exhaust themselves. They fall asleep. Problem solved. Nicole is stunned. She asks how he did that, and the answer is that Richard understood something about his children that no amount of examination would have revealed. He understood, instinctively, without analysis, without philosophy, without ever having read a parenting book or attended a seminar, that the way to get three fighting children to stop is not to reason with them or punish them or explain why their behavior is wrong. It is to redirect their energy toward a shared goal that is absurd enough to be interesting and competitive enough to be exhausting. It is parenting by instinct, parenting by presence, parenting by the accumulated knowledge of a man who has been on the couch watching these three children his entire adult life, and who knows them, not intellectually, but bodily, the way a musician knows an instrument. Nicole recognizes this. The show lets her recognize it. And for a moment, just a moment, the unexamined life produces something the examined life could not have produced. Not through wisdom, through knowing. That through the kind of knowledge that comes from having been in the room every day, for years, paying no attention, and absorbing everything. Is that knowledge? Socrates would say no. Knowledge requires justification. Knowledge requires the ability to articulate why something is true. Richard cannot articulate anything. He just knows. And his knowing works. And Nicole, who examines everything, who analyzes and strategizes and plans, stands in her own living room watching her husband do something she could not have done, and for once, does not know what to say. I keep coming back to something Plato wrote that I think the show understands at a deep level, even if it never references it directly. In the Meno, Plato has Socrates lead an uneducated slave boy through a geometric proof. The boy has never been taught geometry. He has no formal education, but through questioning, through the Socratic method, Socrates draws the correct answer out of him. And Socrates' conclusion is that the boy already knew the answer. He just did not know he knew it. The knowledge was there, waiting to be uncovered. Richard already knows things. He knows his children. He knows how to make Nicole feel loved. He knows, in some deep, unexaminable part of himself, what his family needs in the moments that matter most. The knowledge is there. It has always been there. The problem is not that Richard lacks knowledge. The problem is that the knowledge he has is invisible to any tool of examination that philosophy has ever devised. You cannot question your way to it. You cannot reason your way to it. You can only live your way to it, slowly, over years, on a couch, in a room, and with the people you love, paying no attention, and absorbing everything. Socrates would have tried to question Richard into self-knowledge, and the questioning would have failed. Not because Richard is too stupid to learn, but because the knowledge Richard already has is the wrong shape for the Socratic method. It is body knowledge, presence knowledge, love knowledge. It does not fit in the categories that philosophy provides. It leaks out between the words. It exists in the space between the question and the answer. And no amount of examination can reach it, because examination, by its nature, stands outside the thing it examines. And this knowledge can only be known from inside. That is, I think, the most radical thing this show has ever said about philosophy. And it says it through a pink rabbit who can't take out the trash. Okay. And I need to talk about something that the show does with Richard that I think is the single most underappreciated piece of character writing in the entire series. And it has to do with the way ignorance spreads. Socrates believed that ignorance was contagious, not in the way a disease is contagious, where proximity guarantees infection, in the way that a standard is contagious. When you live around someone who has never examined their choices, their unexamined approach becomes the baseline, the water you swim in, the air you breathe. You stop noticing it because it's always been there, and the things you stop noticing are the things that shape you most completely. Gumball Watterson is his father's son. The show tells you this in 100 ways across 6 seasons. Gumball is lazy. Gumball avoids responsibility. Big Gumball's approach to problems is to panic, make things worse, and then hope someone else fixes it. Gumball is genuinely kind-hearted, and genuinely loving, and genuinely well-intentioned, just like Richard. And like Richard, Gumball has never once sat down and examined why he does what he does, or whether he could do it differently. TV Tropes, which I know is not an academic source, but bear with me, identifies Gumball with a specific label: loser son of loser dad. They point out that most of Gumball's negative traits are things he shares with Richard: the avoidance, the impulsiveness, the preference for comfort over effort, the genuine sweetness that makes you forgive everything else. The show even makes this explicit in the season 4 episode The Test, where the universe itself appears to enforce Gumball's status as a loser in the same way it enforces Richard's unemployment. Any effort for Gumball to not be the loser, the show tells you, results in the universe shifting focus to someone else, because the narrative requires a loser protagonist. Gumball's role, like his father's, is structurally mandated. This is the inheritance that Socrates would have been most alarmed by. Not the poverty, not the incompetence, the unexamined life passing from father to son, like a gene nobody can identify, but everyone can see. Richard never examined his choices, so Gumball never learned that choices could be examined. Richard lived in the cave, so Gumball was born in the cave, and a child born in the cave does not know there is a cave. The walls are just walls. The shadows are just reality. The chain is just gravity. There is a scene in the season 5 episode called The Choices, the Nicole flashback episode I mentioned earlier, where Nicole's alternative futures all begin the same way. She is at a crossroads. One path leads to Richard, Every other path leads somewhere more conventionally successful. And in the montage where she chooses Richard, the show makes a very specific visual choice. It shows baby Gumball, and then toddler Gumball, and then Gumball starting to walk, and Richard encouraging him, and Richard measuring his height, and both of them laughing. The show is saying, without ever stating it explicitly, that Gumball's personality was formed in the warmth of Richard's presence. The kindness came from Richard. The affection came from Richard. The ability to find joy in small things. To be comfortable with imperfection. To love someone without needing them to be anything other than what they are. That came from Richard. And so did the laziness. And so did the avoidance. And so did the inability to examine. They came as a package. The warmth and the cave. The love and the chains. And you cannot separate them because they grew from the same root. Socrates never had children, as far as the historical record tells us. He had students, and his students, Plato chief among them, examined their lives so thoroughly and so publicly that the results are still being discussed 2.5 millennia later. But Socrates chose his students. He chose people who were already inclined toward examination. He did not have to raise a child inside his own limitations and watch those limitations become the child's foundation. Richard did not choose to pass his unexamined life to Gumball. He didn't know he was doing it. He didn't know there was anything to pass. And Gumball, who received it, doesn't know he received anything either. The inheritance is invisible. The cave is comfortable. The couch fits both of them. I want to talk about food. I know that sounds like a strange turn, but stay with me because I think this is where the show does something that would have genuinely concerned Socrates. Richard's relationship with food is not a joke. I mean, the show plays it as a joke, constantly, in every episode, with sight gags and exaggeration and the running bit about sausages. But if you step back and look at what the show is actually depicting, it is a man who uses physical consumption as a substitute for every other form of engagement with reality. Richard eats when he is happy. He eats when he is sad. He eats when he is bored, which is most of the time. He eats when he is supposed to be doing something else. He eats things that are not food. He eats things that are actively dangerous. In one episode, he can sense toast from another room. In another, he runs toward food with an instinctive, involuntary, almost gravitational force that the show describes as innate. Socrates talked about the appetitive soul. Plato expanded on this in The Republic, dividing the human soul into 3 parts. The rational part, which seeks truth, the spirited part, which seeks honor and justice, and the appetitive part, which seeks physical pleasure. In a well-ordered soul, the rational part governs the other 2. The appetitive part is not suppressed or eliminated, but directed, moderated, yet kept in proportion to the rest. Richard's soul, if we're using this framework, is almost entirely appetitive. The rational part has atrophied from disuse. The spirited part flickers occasionally, in moments like the hero, where he feels the sting of not being respected, but it does not sustain itself. What remains is appetite, the desire for food, for comfort, for television, for the immediate sensory experience that requires no examination, no reflection, no engagement with anything beyond the present moment's pleasure. And look, I want to be careful here because I think it would be easy to read this as me saying, Richard is less than human. That is not what I'm saying. That is not what the show is saying either. The appetitive soul is not lesser. It is the foundation. It is the part of us that keeps us alive. That makes us eat when we are hungry, and sleep when we are tired, and reach for warmth when we are cold. Without the appetitive soul, there is nothing to examine, and nothing to be spirited about. The rational and spirited parts of the soul need the appetitive part to exist. They build on top of it. They organize it, but they need it. What Plato was concerned about was not the existence of appetite, but the governance of it. In a well-ordered soul, reason governs appetite the way a skilled rider governs a horse. The horse provides the energy, the movement, the raw power. The rider provides the direction. Without the horse, you go nowhere. Without the rider, the horse goes wherever it wants. And wherever a horse wants to go, left to its own devices, is toward food, toward shelter, toward the nearest patch of comfortable grass. Richard is the horse without the rider. He has all the energy, and all the raw emotional power, and all the capacity for love, and joy, and presence. He just has no direction. He goes toward the nearest sausage. He goes toward the nearest couch. He He goes toward the nearest source of warmth and comfort, and he stays there until something physically moves him. And because nobody in his life has ever successfully played the role of the rider, because Granny JoJo was not a rider, but a fence, keeping the horse in a small paddock rather than teaching it to carry someone, Richard has spent his entire life going wherever his appetites take him. The show understands this with a precision that surprises me every time I look closely at it. Watch how Richard moves. Watch his body language. He does not move with purpose. He drifts. He gravitates. He is pulled toward food the way objects are pulled toward the center of the earth. The show's animation team gives him a specific kind of motion that is different from every other character. Nicole moves with directed, explosive energy. Gumball moves with chaotic, scattered energy. Aeneas moves with precise, economical energy. Richard moves with gravitational energy. He slides downhill toward comfort. He rolls toward the path of least resistance. His body, in every frame, is seeking the nearest horizontal surface. This is appetite made visual. This is the show using its animation to tell you something about the philosophy of its own character that the dialogue never states. Richard's body knows what Richard's mind does not. His body knows it is ungoverned. His body knows there is no rider. And his body has made peace with this in the way that bodies do, which is by finding the most comfortable possible position and staying in it until an external force intervenes. Nicole is usually that external force. Think about how many episodes begin with Nicole asking Richard to do something. Take out the trash, go to the store, get the children, fix the antenna. She provides the direction. She is the rider. And when she is not there, when she is at work or asleep or simply not in the room, Richard returns to the couch with the inevitability of a stone returning to the ground after being thrown. And here is what makes this more than just a character trait. The appetitive soul in Plato's system is the part of the person that is most easily controlled. A person governed by appetite can be managed with rewards and comforts. Give them food, give them entertainment, give them the small, reliable pleasures that don't require thought, and they will stay exactly where you put them. They will not rebel. They will not question. They will not leave the cave, because the cave has snacks. I think the show knows this. I think the show is aware, at a level that most of its audience does not access, that Richard's relationship with food is the same thing as his relationship with ignorance. Both are about filling a space. Both are about consumption as a substitute for examination. Both are about the discovery of a satisfaction so immediate and so uncomplicated that the possibility of anything deeper simply never arises. And I think the show is asking, without ever saying it out loud, whether a culture that organizes itself around the provision of appetitive satisfaction, around food and television and comfort and the management of expectations, is a culture that has chosen Richard's path deliberately. Not for one man, for everyone. Okay, I've been building to something, and I think it's time to say it directly, because I've been circling this idea for a while now, and I think the show is circling it too, carefully, in a way that a kid's show is probably not supposed to circle anything, and here it is. Richard Watterson is not the exception. He is the warning. And the warning is not about stupidity. The warning is about comfort. Socrates was killed because he was uncomfortable. Not physically, intellectually. He made people uncomfortable by asking questions. He made them uncomfortable by showing them the gap between what they believed and what was true. He made them uncomfortable by refusing to let them rest in the warm, settled, unchallenged certainty that they already knew everything they needed to know. He was a gadfly, which is the word he used for himself. A tiny insect that bites a large animal to keep it moving. And Athens decided it would rather swat the fly than keep moving. Richard is what happens when the fly is swatted. Richard is what Athens wanted. A person who does not question, does not examine, does not cause discomfort, does not challenge any assumption or disturb any peace. A person who has found happiness without examination and lives inside it without complaint. A person who blinks. And the show, to its enormous credit, does not judge this. It shows you the cost. It shows you Nicole's exhaustion. It shows you the poverty. And it shows you Gumball developing the same patterns. It shows you Aeneas's questions going unanswered, but it also shows you Richard holding newborn Gumball and beaming. It shows you Richard running at 200 miles per hour to save his children when it matters. It shows you Richard in the shed, looking at old photos of his kids, singing softly to himself, feeling the specific kind of love that does not need to understand itself in order to be real. The show holds both things. the cave and the love, the chains and the warmth, the ignorance and the happiness. And it asks you to decide which one matters more. And then it asks you whether you can really separate them. And then it asks you whether the question itself is fair. I've thought about this a lot, and I don't think the question is fair. I think that's the point. I think the show knows that Socrates was right about the examined life, and also knows that the man sleeping on the couch with his arms around his children is doing something that no amount of examination can replicate. And I think the tension between those two truths is the most honest thing the show has ever produced. More honest than the meta episodes. More honest than The Void. More honest than the show's awareness of its own format. A man who has never thought about anything holds his family together through sheer, unreflective, uncomplicated love. And a philosopher who thought about everything drank hemlock in a prison cell, and neither of them was wrong. Let me go somewhere specific now, because there's an episode I haven't mentioned yet, and I think it's the one that brings all of this together. The Father, Season 6, Episode 6. Aired January 26th, 2018. In this episode, Richard's biological father, Frankie Watterson, returns. Frankie is a con artist. He abandoned Richard when Richard was young, telling him he was going out to buy milk. Richard believed this. He believed it for decades. Into his adult life, Richard held on to the idea that his father had simply gone out for milk and would be back eventually. Think about what that means. Think about it in the context of everything I've been saying about the unexamined life. A man's father walked out on him when he was a child. He told a transparent lie. He was going to buy milk. And Richard, because Richard does not examine anything, because the concept of questioning a statement has never been part of his cognitive toolkit, simply believed it for years, for decades. He folded the lie into his understanding of reality and lived inside it without once turning it over to see what was on the other side. Richard still believed it out of denial, even into his adult life. Despite his incompetency and childishness, Richard can occasionally spout out some good advice. When Frankie returns, Richard tells him something that the show treats as one of its most quietly devastating lines. He says that his children see him as a better father than he is, so he has been trying to live up to their image of him. I need to sit with that for a second, because I think it might be the most self-aware thing Richard has ever said. And even this moment of awareness is not really examination in the Socratic sense. Richard is not questioning his own behavior. He is not asking whether he should be different. He is saying, my children have a picture of me that is better than the reality, and I am trying to become the picture. He is working toward a shadow on the wall. He is trying to match the projection, rather than questioning whether the projection is accurate. And here is where Plato's cave allegory gets turned completely inside out. In Plato's version, the shadows are inferior copies of real things. The goal is to escape the shadows and see the real objects. Richard is doing the opposite. He knows, on some level, that the real him is inadequate. So he is trying to become the shadow. He is trying to reshape himself to match the flattering projection his children have created. He wants to be the shadow because the shadow is better than the thing casting it. Socrates would have said, this is exactly the problem. This is the danger of living in the cave. That you start to prefer the shadows. You start to think the distorted, simplified, two-dimensional version of reality is the one worth pursuing. You lose the ability to distinguish between what is real and what is projected. And eventually, you stop caring about the distinction entirely. But the show asks something Socrates never asked. What if the shadow is aspirational? What if the distorted version of yourself that your children see is not a lie, but a goal? What if the cave wall is not a prison, but a mirror that shows you, not who you are, but who you could be? Richard's children believe he is their hero. Richard is not their hero by any objective measure, but he is trying to become the thing they believe he already is. And that trying, that effort to walk toward a better version of yourself that exists only in someone else's eyes, is that not its own form of growth? Is that not its own form of becoming? Socrates grew through self-examination. Richard grows through being loved. The mechanisms are completely different. The Socratic method strips away false beliefs to reveal what is true underneath. Richard's method adds a false belief, the belief that he is better than he is, and then tries to build upward until the belief is no longer false. One removes, the other adds. One questions, the other accepts. And look, I know this sounds like I'm letting Richard off the hook. I know it sounds like I'm romanticizing ignorance. I don't think I am. I think what I'm doing is taking seriously something the show takes seriously, which is the possibility that love can do work that philosophy cannot. That the reason a 4-year-old's picture of her father matters is not because it is accurate, but because it is believed. And belief, even unexamined belief, even philosophically indefensible belief, has the power to reshape the believer. But here's the thing. Here's the part that hurts in that specific way that Gumball hurts when it decides to stop being funny for a moment and just be honest. Richard trying to live up to his children's image of him might be the most noble thing anyone in the show does. It might be the closest Richard ever comes to the examined life. Not through questioning, but through aspiration. Not through philosophy, but through love. He sees a version of himself in his children's eyes that is better than who he is. And instead of examining whether that version is real or achievable or accurate, and he simply tries to walk toward it. Socrates would have said, "This is not enough." Socrates would have said that aspiration without examination is just another shadow. That wanting to be good without understanding what good means is running on a treadmill, moving your legs, going nowhere, feeling like you're getting somewhere. But the show says something different. The show says that Richard trying, even without understanding, even without examination, even without the faintest idea of what he's really doing or why, is enough to make his children draw a picture that says "our hero" and mean it. And maybe that's a kind of knowledge that Socrates never needed, because he never had children who loved him through their own projected image of who he was. I'm going to tell you something personal now. And I know that's a weird thing to do in a video about a cartoon rabbit, but I think it matters. I think about Richard a lot when I think about my own life. Not because I'm like him, or not entirely, but because I think everyone is a little bit like him. I think everyone has areas of their life where the couch is more comfortable than the question, where the Mayo run feels like a hero's quest because the alternative is to look at the real thing and deal with it, where the shadows are warm and the sunlight is blinding, and the choice between the two is not as obvious as Socrates made it sound in the courtroom. And I think the show knows that. I think the amazing world of Gumball, beneath the mixed media insanity and the meta humor, and the fact that there's a literal T-Rex attending middle school, it knows that the hardest philosophical question is not "what is the good?" or "what is justice?" The hardest philosophical question is the one Socrates posed, and Richard answers every day without knowing he's answering it. Is the unexamined life worth living? Richard says yes. He says it with every nap, every sausage, every day on the couch, every moment of uncomplicated joy, every time he holds his children and feels something he could never name and doesn't try to. And the show neither confirms nor denies it. The show just holds the question up, turns it slowly in the mixed media light of Elmore, and lets you see it from every angle. The 2D angle, the 3D angle, the live-action photograph angle, the puppet angle, every style of animation the show has at its disposal, every tool for showing you the same thing from a different perspective. They deployed in service of a question that has been asked for 2,400 years and has never been answered to everyone's satisfaction. I want to go deeper into something I touched on earlier, because I think I moved past it too quickly. Richard's relationship with his father, Frankie Watterson, and what it tells us about the inheritance of ignorance across generations. In The Man, Season 3, Episode 18, aired October 9th, 2014, Richard discovers that Frankie, who he believed had gone out to buy milk decades ago, has actually returned to Elmore and is now dating Granny JoJo's new husband's mother. The episode reveals that Frankie is a con artist. He has always been a con artist. He abandoned his family not because of some tragic circumstance, but because that is what con artists do. They take what they can and they leave. And here is what gets me about this. Frankie is, in Socratic terms, a sophist. He is a person who uses the appearance of knowledge and wisdom to manipulate others. The sophists of Athens were the people Socrates spent his career dismantling. They charged fees for teaching rhetoric, which they claimed was wisdom, but which Socrates identified as manipulation. They taught people how to argue persuasively, not how to argue truthfully. They taught the skill of appearing wise without being wise. Frankie does this instinctively. He is charming. He is persuasive. He knows what to say to make people trust him. He has the social intelligence that Richard completely lacks, and he uses it to take things from people. He used it to take himself from Richard's childhood. Now look at the generational chain. Frankie, the sophist, produces a child, and abandons him. Granny Jojo, terrified by the abandonment, overcompensates by sheltering that child so completely that he never develops independent thought. Richard, the product of a sophist father and a smothering mother, becomes the person we've been discussing all night. The unexamined life, the cave dweller, the man on the couch. Socrates was fighting the sophists. He was fighting the idea that manipulation could substitute for truth, that rhetoric could substitute for wisdom, that the appearance of knowledge was as good as knowledge itself. And he won that fight, in a sense. The sophists faded. Socratic philosophy endured. But Socrates never addressed what happens to the children of the sophists. He never asked what happens when the manipulator's child grows up without the manipulator's tools, but also without the philosopher's tools, without any tools at all. Richard is the answer. Richard is what happens when the sophist's legacy and the smothering parent's fear combine to produce a person who has been stripped of both manipulation and examination. He cannot deceive because he is too simple. He cannot question because he was never taught how. He is the vacuum left by the collision of two opposite forces, the con artist's absence and the mother's presence canceling each other out, leaving nothing. And here is why this matters to the show's broader argument. Richard is not a natural phenomenon. He was made, manufactured by specific forces, operating on specific raw material. The show takes care to show you each component. Frankie's abandonment, Jojo's smothering, the combination producing a person who is, philosophically speaking, a blank space where a human being should be. Socrates would have said, this person can be woken up, the chains can be broken, the cave can be escaped. The philosophical tradition that Socrates founded is built on the premise that every human being has the capacity for examination, that the rational part of the soul exists in everyone and can be activated through the right kind of questioning. But the show asks, what if the right kind of questioning never arrives? What if nobody plays the role of Socrates in Richard's life? What if nobody asks the questions? Nicole doesn't ask them because she's too busy working. Anais doesn't ask them because she's 4 years old and nobody listens to her. Gumball doesn't ask them because he's been shaped by Richard's example into someone who doesn't know what questions are for. Darwin asks them occasionally, but gently, and they slide off Richard like water off that contented duck I mentioned earlier. There is no Socrates in Elmore. That is the show's darkest observation. The town is full of people in various states of unexamination. Larry is the closest thing to a freed prisoner, and he works 7 jobs and has been dragged back to the couch at least once. Mr. Small, the school counselor, is supposed to be the person who helps people examine their lives, and he is a hippie who lives in his office and seems to need more help than anyone he counsels. Miss Simeon has been teaching for over 1,000,000 years, the show tells us, and she has learned nothing and changed nothing. Elmore is a town without a gadfly. It is Athens if Socrates had never been born. It is the cave without a freed prisoner. And Richard, sitting on his couch at the center of it, is the logical product of that absence, not the cause, the symptom. There is one more episode I want to discuss before I start bringing everything together, and it's one that I think encapsulates the entire Richard Socrates tension in a single 11-minute story. The Wand, Season 1, Episode 29, aired January 3rd, 2012. In this episode, Richard finds a star-shaped wand at a garage sale and becomes convinced it has magical powers. He waves it around, performing spells, and through a series of coincidences, things happen that seem to confirm the wand works. A traffic light changes, a door opens, small. Everyday events that happen to coincide with Richard waving the wand, and which Richard interprets as evidence of its power. Gumball and Darwin try to tell him the wand isn't real. They try to explain coincidence. They try to show him that the events would have happened anyway, that correlation is not causation, that believing in a plastic wand's magical powers is not rational. Richard does not hear them. He cannot hear them. The wand makes him feel powerful. It makes him feel capable. It makes him feel like he can do something, anything, in a world where his actual ability to affect outcomes is essentially nil. The wand is not magic, but it gives him something that magic would give him if it existed. Agency, the feeling of mattering, the feeling of being able to change things. And here is where the show does something that I think is genuinely profound. The Wand episode is played for comedy, obviously. It's funny. Richard waving a plastic star around and believing he's a wizard is funny. But underneath the comedy, the episode is asking a question that Socrates wrestled with and never fully resolved. Is a false belief that makes you functional better than a true belief that makes you helpless. Richard with the wand is active, confident, engaged with the world. He walks around doing things. He participates. He leaves the couch. He interacts with reality in a way that he almost never does otherwise. The wand gives him the illusion of capability, and the illusion produces actual behavior change. It works. Not the way he thinks it works. Not through magic, through belief. Socrates would have stripped the belief away. That was his method. Find the false belief, question it, reveal its falseness, replace it with truth. But in Richard's case, what would the truth replace the wand with? What does Richard have if you take away the illusion of agency? He has the couch. He has the television. He has the exact same passivity he had before, but now without even the comforting fiction that he could do something if he wanted to. The show resolves the episode by having the wand prove not to be magical, and Richard being disappointed. He loses the belief. He goes back to the couch. The brief window of agency closes, and the show does not celebrate this. It does not frame the truth as liberation. It frames it as loss. The truth takes something from Richard that the lie gave him. And the show is honest enough to acknowledge that the taking is not unambiguously good. This is, I think, the hardest version of the Socratic question the show ever asks. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But the examined life is sometimes not livable. The truth is sometimes a weapon that cuts the person holding it. The sunlight outside the cave is sometimes so bright it blinds you. And the cave, with its shadows and its chains and its warm fire, is sometimes the only place where a person like Richard can feel anything at all. I don't think the show resolves this. I don't think it wants to. I think the show wants you to feel the discomfort of two incompatible truths occupying the same space. The truth that examination is better, and the truth that examination has a cost that not everyone can pay. That's what this show is doing. Under the comedy, under the catchphrases, under the 11-minute format, and the children's network, and the pink rabbit sleeping on a couch. Let me bring this somewhere else now, because there's a thread I've been avoiding, and I think it's time to pull it. But first, I want to talk about Darwin, because Darwin is the most Socratically interesting Watterson, and nobody ever treats him that way. Darwin Watterson was a goldfish. He was a pet. He lived in a bowl, and then he sprouted legs, climbed out of the bowl, developed the ability to breathe air, learned to speak, and became a member of the family. This is his origin. He was not born into the cave. He was placed in a bowl inside it and then escaped. And here is what is remarkable about Darwin in the context of everything we've been discussing. Darwin was raised by Richard alongside Gumball, in the same house with the same example, exposed to the same unexamined approach to life. But Darwin is different. Darwin has a moral compass. Darwin tries to do the right thing. Darwin feels guilt and empathy and discomfort with wrongdoing in ways that Gumball, who is more like Richard, often does not. In The Hero, the episode where Gumball and Darwin mock Richard at school, it is Darwin who wants to apologize first. It is Darwin who stages the rescue at the junkyard to help Richard feel like a hero. It is Darwin who says to Gumball, when Gumball is being cruel, "Don't you know people have feelings?" Darwin is the one member of the family who received Richard's love without inheriting Richard's blindness. He absorbed the warmth without the chains. And he learned the contentment without the passivity. And I think the reason, the show's quiet, never stated reason, is that Darwin had a life before the cave. He had a bowl. He had a world so small and so limited that when he left it, the mere fact of having left was enough to make him sensitive to the limits of every world he entered afterward. Socrates talked about anamnesis, the idea that learning is actually remembering, that the soul knows things it has forgotten, and the work of philosophy is to help the soul remember what it already knew. Darwin remembers, I think, not consciously, but somewhere in the part of him that was once a goldfish in a bowl, he remembers what it felt like to see only one wall, to know only one reality, to have the entirety of his existence bounded by glass. And that memory, even unexamined, it makes him the family member most likely to notice when the walls are closing in. Gumball does not have this memory. Gumball was born into the cave. The cave is all he knows. And the distance between Gumball and Darwin, the reason Darwin is kinder and more empathetic and more inclined to do the right thing, is not intelligence. It is experience. Darwin has been outside. Gumball has not. And you do not need to examine that difference to feel it. The show plays this mostly for comedy. Darwin is the voice of reason that gets ignored. He is the conscience that gets overridden. He is the angel on the shoulder that Gumball routinely pushes off. But underneath the comedy, the show is making a point that I think Socrates would have appreciated enormously. The capacity for examination is not always born from intelligence. Sometimes it is born from having been somewhere else, from having seen, even briefly, that the wall you're looking at is not the only wall there is. Now, Nicole. Nicole is the philosopher's wife. She is the person who married the unexamined life and has to live inside the consequences of that choice every single day. I keep thinking about what it costs Nicole to love Richard, not emotionally, practically. The show tells you, in episode after episode, what it costs. It costs her sleep. It costs her health. It costs her career, which is limited to a single job at a factory, because there is no margin for error when you are the sole income for 5 people and your husband has spent the savings on a star. It costs her the relationship with her parents, who disapproved of Richard, and who she left behind because their control was suffocating, and Richard's freedom was intoxicating. And she didn't realize until much later that freedom and emptiness can look exactly the same from a distance. Socrates' wife was named Xanthippe. History has not been kind to her. She is described in most accounts as shrewish, nagging, difficult. But I've always wondered about Xanthippe, because being married to Socrates, a man who spent all his time in the marketplace, asking strangers questions about justice, while his family needed groceries, must have been its own kind of nightmare. The examined life and the unpaid bills, the pursuit of truth, and the children who needed dinner. Nicole is a better version of Xanthippe. She is married to the opposite of Socrates, a man who asks no questions instead of too many. But the domestic result is strangely similar. A household where one person is doing all the work while the other pursues their essential nature, whether that nature is philosophical questioning or competitive napping. But here is where the show does something genuinely beautiful with Nicole that I think goes beyond any simple parallel. Nicole knows. She sees Richard clearly. She has always seen him clearly. She chose him with her eyes open. She chose him not because she was ignorant of his limitations, but because she understood, in a way that Socrates might not have had the framework for, that love does not require the other person to be examined. It requires them to be present. Richard is present. That is his gift. The gift he does not know he has, and cannot name, and would be unable to explain if you sat him down and asked. In a world where everyone is rushing and striving and performing and optimizing, Richard is on the couch. He is there. He is available. When you walk into the room, Richard is in it. When you need someone to be in the room with you, Richard is your man. He brings nothing but himself. And what he brings, while intellectually negligible, is physically and emotionally and consistently there. Nicole, whose entire childhood was defined by parents who were present only as expectations, who were in the room only as standards to be met, chose a man who is in the room only as himself. And I think the show is saying that this, in its own way, is a form of knowledge that Socrates never cataloged. The knowledge of how to be present, the wisdom of not leaving. The examined life is one kind of life. The life that stays when you need it is another. The show never privileges one over the other. It just shows you both and trusts you to feel the tension. I want to talk about one more thing before I start bringing this home, and it's something that I think connects Richard to the audience in a way that might make some people uncomfortable. The show makes you like him. That's not an accident. It is an extremely deliberate choice by Ben Bacalé and the writing team to make Richard lovable. He is voiced by Dan Russell with a warmth and sincerity that never curdles into irony. His design, a big pink rabbit with long ears and a soft belly, and an expression that vacillates between sleepy contentment and childlike delight, is calibrated to trigger affection. You look at Richard and you feel fondness. You do not feel alarm. And this is exactly what Socrates would have been alarmed by. Because Socrates understood, in a way that I think most people still haven't fully absorbed 24 centuries later, that the most dangerous version of ignorance is the version you enjoy, the version you find charming, the version you root for, the version you would invite into your living room and share a meal with and never once think to question. The audience's affection for Richard is the cave watching the shadows and enjoying the show. We are entertained by his ignorance. We are comforted by his simplicity. We find warmth in his unexamined love. And we do not ask whether the warmth is sufficient, whether it compensates for the cost, whether the family would be better served by a father who could hold a job and read an internet page before clicking yes, and take out the trash without first trying to move it with his mind. We don't ask because asking would ruin the show. Asking would make it a different kind of story. Asking would turn the comedy into a tragedy. And we don't want tragedy. We want the couch. There is something else here that I've been thinking about, and I think it ties the whole thing together. The show is meta. You know this if you've watched it. Gumball is one of the most self-aware cartoons ever made. It knows it's a cartoon. The characters have discussed being animated. They've noticed when the animation style changes. They've interacted with the edges of their own reality. Rob, the show's recurring villain, became a villain precisely because he fell out of the narrative and saw the structure from outside. And Richard, in all of this meta-awareness, is the one character who never notices. He never breaks the fourth wall in a meaningful way. He never looks at the camera and acknowledges the audience. He never questions the format or the genre or the rules of the world he lives in. Every other member of the family has had moments of meta-awareness. Richard sleeps through all of them. This is the cave made literal. The show is a cave. It is a constructed reality, animated, scripted, produced. And Richard is the character who lives inside it most completely. He is the character who is most fully a resident of the show's reality, never stepping outside it, never seeing the walls, never noticing the fire behind him, or the puppeteers holding the shapes that cast the shadows. Socrates said that the first step toward wisdom is recognizing that you are in a cave. The first step is seeing the walls. And Richard has never seen the walls. Even when the show itself is showing them to him, he does not see them. He is the character who is most deeply embedded in the constructed reality of the show. And the show uses this as both comedy and commentary. He is funny because he doesn't notice. He is significant because he doesn't notice. The two things are the same thing. And here is the final layer. We are watching Richard from outside the show. We can see the walls. We can see the animation. We can see the constructed nature of his reality. We have the perspective of the freed prisoner looking back into the cave. And what do we do with that perspective? We laugh. We find him charming. We call him our favorite character. We watch him from outside the cave and enjoy the view of a man who doesn't know he's inside one. And there it is. And the show's final, quietest argument. We are all in the cave. We are all watching the shadows. And the shadows are entertaining. And the chains are comfortable. And the fire behind us is warm. And we have discovered happiness. And we blink. I want to say one more thing before I let you go, because I've spent this entire video treating Richard as a philosophical case study, and I think I owe both him and you something more personal than that. I've been making videos about animated shows for a while now, and the thing that keeps me coming back to Gumball, the reason I keep finding new things to say about this show when I think I've run out of things to say, is that Gumball does something that almost no other animated series has ever done. It takes its characters seriously, not solemnly, not pretentiously, seriously. And it looks at a pink rabbit on a couch and asks what he means, not as a punchline, as a person. And the answer is complicated. The answer is that Richard means something different depending on which angle you look at him from. From the Socratic angle, he is the warning. He is the person the entire Western philosophical tradition was designed to wake up. From the family angle, he is the anchor. He is the person who is always there, always present, always available in his own clumsy, useless, deeply sincere way. From the comedic angle, he is the punchline. He is the joke that never stops being funny, because the gap between what he should be and what he is never stops being enormous. And from the angle of the show itself, from the angle of a cartoon made with 2D animation and 3D rendering and live-action photographs and puppet characters and pixel art and anime parodies all happening in the same frame, Richard is the thing that holds it all together. Not through capability, through sincerity. In a world of mixed media, in a show that is constantly aware of its own artificiality, constantly winking at the camera, constantly pulling back the curtain to show you the machinery, Richard is the one character who never winks. He never pulls back the curtain. He doesn't know there is a curtain. He just sits on the couch and loves his family and eats his sausages. And that sincerity, that complete, unironic, unexamined commitment to being exactly what he is the gravitational center that everything else in the show orbits around. Ben Bocquelet based Richard on his own father, Richard Bocquelet. I think about that a lot. The creator of one of the most formally experimental and intellectually playful cartoons in the history of the medium looked at his own father and saw something worth building a show around. Not intelligence, not ambition, not the examined life. something else, something quieter, something that sits on a couch and stays. And there is something about that decision, that creative decision to build a world around a man who does not think, that feels like its own kind of answer to the question Socrates asked. Because Bacchus did not put Richard at the center of the show as a warning. He put him there as a father. He put him there because the specific, clumsy, useless, present love of a man who does not examine his life was. For the person who made this show, the thing most worth animating, the thing most worth spending 6 seasons and 200 episodes, and every animation technique available, drawing over and over and over again. A pink rabbit on a couch, in every episode, in every style, in every possible configuration of this world's mixed media madness. Always there, always the same, always Richard. There is a version of philosophy that would say, this is sentimentality. That emotion is not an argument. That love is not a justification for ignorance. And that version of philosophy is not wrong. But there is a version of a children's show that says something else. That says the most important thing about a person is not what they know, but whether they stayed. And that version of the show is not wrong either. And I don't know if the unexamined life is worth living. I've been asking that question for the entire duration of this video, across 2,500 years of philosophy and 6 seasons of a cartoon about a blue cat, and I still don't know. But I know that the show doesn't know either. And I know that not knowing is the honest answer. And I know that Socrates, who said he knew nothing, would have respected the honesty of not knowing, even if he would have insisted on continuing to ask. Richard will not continue to ask. Richard will go back to the couch. The cave will remain. The shadows will flicker. The chains will be comfortable. And Nicole will come home from work, exhausted, and sit next to him. And somewhere in the space between the examined life and the unexamined one, and something that does not have a name in any philosophical tradition will exist. Something warm, something real, something that 2,400 years of questioning has not managed to either prove or disprove. And we blink. This is where I could wrap up. This is where a less honest version of this video would tell you what to think, would say Socrates was right, or Richard was right, or the show has answered the question, or the question has no answer. But I think the show deserves better than that. And I think you deserve better than that. So let me tell you what I actually think, which is something I've been trying to figure out for weeks, and I'm still not entirely sure I've landed on. I think Richard Watterson is what Socrates warned us about. I think that is literally, provably true. The unexamined life. The person who does not question their choices or understand their ignorance. The prisoner who is content in the cave and does not know it is a cave. Socrates described this person in extraordinary detail and said they were not living a life worth the name. And Richard is that person. Exactly, precisely, without exaggeration or metaphor. But I also think the show is asking whether Socrates was measuring the right things. Socrates measured wisdom. He measured truth. He measured the capacity for self-knowledge. And by those measurements, Richard is the worst case scenario. The person who has failed most completely. The last man, to borrow a phrase I've used before, who has settled so completely into comfort that he has lost even the desire to be more. But the show measures something else. The show measures presence, loyalty, the specific, unreflective, irrational, philosophically indefensible willingness to be there for people you love, even when you don't understand what you're doing or why you're doing it. And by those measurements, Richard is not the worst case. He is, in his own way, the best. He is the man who ran at 200 miles per hour to save his children, who held newborn Gumball and learned to pretend to breastfeed, who stayed on the couch for 38 years because the couch was where his family was, and being where his family was felt like enough, who never examined his life and loved every unexamined second of it, who was warned about by a philosopher drinking hemlock in 399 BC, and would have offered that philosopher a sausage and a seat on the couch, and genuinely, truly, from the bottom of his unexamined heart, meant it as kindness. Socrates would not have accepted the sausage. He would have started asking questions, and Richard would not have understood the questions. And they would have sat there, the philosopher and the rabbit, on a couch in a cave in a town called Elmore, where a T-Rex goes to middle school and the universe tears itself apart if you get a job. And neither of them would have been wrong. That is the show. That is what it's doing. Underneath the puppets and the pixel art and the anime parodies and the live-action backgrounds and every other insane visual choice this cartoon makes, it is sitting two incompatible truths on a couch and asking which one you'd rather live with. I don't know the answer. I've watched this show more times than I can count, and I still don't know the answer. But I think the asking is the point. Socrates would have agreed with that, at least. The asking is always the point. I started this by asking you a question. What if the most dangerous character on a children's show is the guy sleeping on the couch? And now we've been through the cave, and the courtroom, and the grocery store, and the shed, and the dinner table, and 24 centuries of philosophy, and I think the answer is yes. He is the most dangerous character. Not because he causes harm on purpose, but because his comfort is contagious, because his contentment is warm, because his unexamined love feels like enough, and Socrates' examined truth feels like cold air coming through a gap in the wall. And I think the show knows one more thing, something it communicates through its animation rather than its dialogue. And something I've never seen anyone articulate, but which I think is central to understanding what Gumball is doing with this character. Look at how Richard is animated. Look at the specific choices the show makes about his visual presence. In a show where characters are animated in radically different styles, where a puppet dinosaur shares a classroom with a 2D cat and a 3D cactus and a balloon made of what appears to be solid blue plastic, Richard is always animated in the same consistent 2D style. He does not glitch. He does not transform into other rendering modes. He does not change mid-scene the way other characters sometimes do. In a show that is constantly drawing your attention to the constructed, artificial, multi-layered nature of its own reality, Richard is the most visually stable element on screen. And I think this is deliberate. I think the show is using its animation to reinforce its philosophical argument. Richard is stable because he does not examine. Examination produces instability. Examination produces the awareness that reality is constructed, that the walls are walls, that the shadows are shadows. Characters who are more meta-aware, more self-examining, more engaged with the constructed nature of Elmore tend to be the ones who experience visual disruption. Rob fell through the void and came back glitched, literally broken by his awareness of the show's structure. Gumball has moments where the animation shifts around him in ways that suggest the fabric of his reality is less stable than it appears. Richard never has these moments. He is immune to the meta. He is the most real-seeming character in a show made of layers upon layers of artificiality. And that visual stability, that unwavering 2D pinkness sitting there on the couch while the entire mixed media world swirls around him, is the show's way of saying that the unexamined life, whatever its costs, has a solidity to it, a groundedness, a weight that the examined life, for all its advantages, sometimes lacks. You can question everything and float, or you can question nothing and stay. The show gives you both options. It trusts you to decide which one you need. Richard Watterson is what Socrates warned us about, and Socrates died for the warning, and Richard lived, and he is still on the couch, and his children still love him, and Nicole still chose him, and the star he bought still died, and the mayo is still in the fridge, and the shadows are still on the wall, and they are warm, and we are watching, and we have discovered happiness, and we blink. Thank you so much for staying with me through all of this. I know it was a lot. I know I went deep. But I think this show deserves to be taken seriously. And I think Richard Watterson is a more complicated character than almost anyone gives him credit for. If this resonated with you, please consider subscribing. It helps us keep making these. And there are so many more corners of Gumball that we haven't explored yet. So many more characters. So many more episodes. So many more caves to sit inside and wonder about. Good night, everyone. Sleep well.